Welcome back, everyone, to Law and Crime. We're talking about the James Colley case in Florida. This is a case where a husband who is in the process of splitting up with his wife is accused of killing the wife and her friend. There were a couple survivors in the house, and at least one of them testified thus far in this case, and it was a showdown in court when that happened. David Katz is here to talk a little bit about the case as testimony rolls along this afternoon. So, talk about some bizarre body language in court. The defendant himself is sitting there with his hands on his ears, refusing to listen to the medical examiner's testimony.
Well, I saw that, and I've never seen, either in prosecuting or defending cases, I've never seen somebody who acts so guilty to a jury's point of view that they can't even stand to hear the evidence against them. If they didn't do all those things, why should it bother them so much to hear it? They'd be just like another spectator, another person hearing the testimony. So I find that just absolutely extraordinary, and the jury's sitting right there. There's an instruction that they're not supposed to use what's said in the court to be an incriminating statement, but how can they not notice something that blatant when the defendant does that right in front of them?
Are they going to try to turn around and say, well, he just couldn't bear to listen to this whole thing? Because part of the defense here is that he was under the influence of a drug, Ambien. And that's where the defense is trying to go with this, trying to say that it was some kind of an involuntary intoxication, that this caused all these effects with him. I mean, is he going to say that he didn't mean to do this and he can't bear to listen to the testimony of what the drug caused him to do?
He's absolutely going to say that, Aaron. That seems to be where he's going. But at the same time, it seems he's going to say that this was a byproduct of Ambien that he never could have imagined. And all of a sudden, he has this total freak out and he shouldn't be held legally responsible, at least that he didn't have premeditation or he didn't have malice. He's going to certainly try to reduce the degree of the homicide.
Well, we're going to continue to listen to testimony in this case. The lead detective was on the stand, the lead investigator, I should say. We're going to cut back to courtroom now because testimony continues. Incredible footage we just watched in court in this case. We're following the James Colley case in Florida. Look, David Katz is here to break it down. We just saw the two survivors who fled from that home go running across the street in this more distant surveillance video. But again, we watched the prosecutor play that out with one of the investigators on the case with a pointer saying, okay, this is Lamar Dubberly escaping from the garage. He goes running down the street. A few minutes later, Rachel Hendricks goes running from the scene.
Well, the surveillance video was just incredible. I prosecuted cases when we didn't have anything like that. It makes it come alive like a TV show. I mean, it's real life, but it looks like a TV show. It was so perfect the way it was just captured there on the show and the way that the police captured it. Here are two victims running away from this carnage. And you can see the one's moving really fast. I guess that's the man who goes first. The woman's obviously moving as fast as she can. But it's a devastating piece of emotional evidence for the jury.
Yeah, I mean, this is what jurors like, though, because just about everybody's got these camera kits now on their houses and whatnot. They're inexpensive. They're high definition, so even if the police or prosecutors have to zoom way, way in or blow up a small area of a frame, you can still get a lot of detail. You can tell the color of the clothing these people are wearing, and it adds credibility to the testimony. The testimony matches the video. I
could see the first one was a man. I could see the later one was a woman. I could see how they were dressed, and you could see that they were scared. I mean, of course they were scared. Here was this carnage, this killing going on, but they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and wasn't that something?
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of the defense here? This defense that Ambien somehow played a role in what was happening. Let's hold that thought, though. We're going to take a quick break here on Law and Crime. We're going to be back with more testimony in the James Colley case in Florida. Again, two dead, the defendant's wife and her best friend. We'll be back with more live testimony in a moment. We're listening to the James Colley case in Florida, where a defendant is accused of killing his wife, who was in the process of leaving him, and his wife's best friend. David Katz is in town to help us break this down. David, look, we're hearing from this friend, this neighbor on the stand, that the defendant apparently found sex toys in his house, thinking that his wife was with somebody else in the process of leaving him, and apparently brought all this stuff to this neighbor and wanted to unburden himself, I guess, about it. What do you make of this?
Well, this is a devastating piece of evidence. They're asking for the death penalty. And in order to get the death penalty, they have to show that there's some real motive, some real anger here. And this shows the anger from the next door neighbor is able to confirm and testify in front of the jury that The defendant was aware of sex toys being inside the house of his estranged wife, and also there's a photograph of a guy mowing the lawn. That they're going to argue that this defendant put two and two together, was in a rage. This was not an unexpected byproduct of Ambien ingestion. This was the rage from that jealousy. The defendant couldn't control it. He didn't try to control it, and he killed him. And it's a premeditated murder, and it's worthy of the death penalty. That's where the government's going.
Yeah, you sound like the prosecutor now. Normally, you're very clearly in the defense category here, David. But look, you have to be able to predict the other side's move. And this witness apparently took a picture of the purported assumed new lover, whatnot, mowing the wife's grass, and this is the guy in the witness stand who took the picture. I mean, doesn't that antagonize the situation?
It absolutely exacerbates the situation, but I was a prosecutor, and I convicted somebody of first-degree murder, and you have to have something like this if you want a first-degree murder conviction.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up the discussion real quick. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So this is footage of the defendant himself apparently going into this gas station. He bought gas and apparently bought beer. So, David, connecting the relevance of this, you think that the prosecution's trying to end on a pretty strong note here before the jurors go into a weekend where they have to kind of mull over some of this?
Yes, when I was a prosecutor, that's what I would have done. This is something that they think is strong for their case. They want to leave on a high note with the jury for the weekend, thinking, wow, the prosecution really has something very strong here. What I don't know right now is whether it's going to show that he's calm. If he's calm, that's going to dispel the idea that he was on this Ambien influence and out of his mind on Ambien. Or it's going to show that he does something weird inside of this convenience store, and I just don't know which one.
Yeah, that's the defendant going into the cooler there, apparently for some beer, I'm hearing, and in the white shirt, black pants. So he goes in for some beer. I'm not a pharmacist, but does one mix Ambien and beer?
It's probably counterindicated on the bottle. Like
yeah.
Liquor is almost counterindicated with every pharmaceutical product. But this is, I think, going to be to show that he's pretty calm. He's not somebody who's so out of it. He's pretty deliberative. He's doing everything. He's a man with a plan. The plan is to go kill somebody.
Yeah, but, you know, so if he looks calm here, then how does that play into the theory that he's all wound up and enraged when he commits the attack?
Well, they're going to say,
in other words, that he planned it and that he knew it was going to happen, and that's why he's just going about his everyday business?
I think they're going to say that he planned it. He was going to get revenge. He did it coolly, coldly. He may have done it in rage. But look how calm he was. He went into the store. He didn't do anything weird. He bought his products. He paid, and now he's going to do Part B of the plan, which is to go and kill her.
So, in other words, if he were suffering some ill effect from the Ambien, he'd be at home, he'd be laying down, he'd be infirmed, he'd be something other than going about his everyday life.
And he's not getting into an argument with anyone there. He's only going to get into an argument with the people he wants to have a very serious, lethal argument with, which is his ex-wife. I think that's going to be their theory. And if I can say one more thing, if you try to present this sort of a defense and you try to negate in front of a jury or show that there's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that there's premeditation or malice, I believe you have to have an expert.
Go on.
I think they have to have either a pharmacological expert who's going to say that that's the kind of side effect you might expect for Ambien mixed with beer, with his particular psychology or his makeup, or you have to have a psychologist who says that he was a person of diminished capacity or diminished actuality at the time. Without those things, I don't believe that they're going to be able to succeed in diminishing the level of homicide. That is to say, to show that what was in his mind was not premeditation, and to show that what was in his mind was not malice aforethought.
You know, from what I remember from the initial stages of this case, the judge wanted to be really clear with the defendant, hey, look, you know that your attorneys are basically going to concede that you're the shooter. It seems that the only thing the defense is really trying to worry about is that possible death penalty or going after an aggravating factor somehow.
Yeah, I think that's what the defense is going to be. And my point is just to have somebody say, boy, he was weird, or to have a neighbor say he seemed like he was acting out. In my experience, that doesn't succeed. I have a case right now where I'm trying an attempted murder. I'm trying to negate the mental elements, and I have a tremendous psychologist on my side. He's someone who usually works for the government, but he's offered an opinion in this case, which is consistent with our defense. I think without that, these cases are very perilous for the defense, and I think this fellow could end up getting the death penalty. And on what you just said about there being evidence that he's the shooter, apparently it's irrefutable because there's 2 eyewitnesses who remain alive.
Exactly, which is why the defense basically wanted to concede it and go after some of these other points. The statute allows that defense, and that's why the defense is being pressed. We're going to take a break here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll be back with more live testimony in the James Colley case when we return. Just to give you folks a sense of what's happening in the James Colley case in Florida, let's broaden this out and look at the overall timeline. So prosecutors have presented evidence in this trial. It's a double murder trial with a possible death penalty. Here's what happened. The defendant was in the process of separating from his wife and had come from a contentious court hearing pursuant to that separation. He left that court hearing very agitated, at least that's the accusation, went to the mini mart where we just watched surveillance footage showing him putting fuel in his car, getting a single Corona and a pack of cigarettes out of the cooler and out of the cigarette section at the store, and he takes off from the parking lot at 10:16 a.m. He left that mini mart, goes to the house, confronts his wife, his wife's friend, and then a couple of other people are there in the home as well. That's when the altercation happened. And then earlier this afternoon, we saw the surveillance footage from a neighbor's house in the development where these folks lived, capturing the 2 survivors of the attack, Lamar Dubberly and Rachel Hendricks, fleeing from the scene. So that's what prosecutors believe happened in this case. David Katz is here with us in New York City to help us break this down. Jurors like it when there's a story, and they like it when there's pictures that back up the theory, and that's exactly what we have here.
Well, the prosecution so far has a compelling story. A picture's worth 1,000 words. They have 2 great pictures, the surveillance tape that we just saw inside the mini market, and they also have the surveillance of the street where you see the terrified survivors running away from the shooting, which they're going to be able to prove through the same testimony of those 2 witnesses was done by the defendant. So it looks like his only hope in this case is some kind of mental defense, that he didn't premeditate or that he didn't act with malice, and he claims that he was under the side effects of Ambien. And the point I was making before was, for his sake, if he has any hope of being acquitted, I believe he ought to have an expert, either a psychologist or a toxicologist, who can support that sort of a defense.
Yeah, but let's line up the time here, because we heard in the surveillance recording that was just shown from the mini mart that this guy apparently drives out of the parking lot at 10:16 a.m. And if I'm noticing, reading my notes properly here, the people were running from the scene at 10:34, 10:36. That's a 20-minute window where this guy goes from the mini mart, goes and then is alleged to have committed the attack. Well, I mean, his attorneys basically have conceded that he was the shooter. It's just a question of why he did it. Okay, so he does the attack, and the people are fleeing within 20 minutes. That's a pretty short window, and I think the state's probably going to make the argument that he looked normal in those surveillance recordings. There's nothing wrong with him.
Right, and the scary thing here is that most people do abide by protective orders, and they work. But this is the one where it obviously fell apart spectacularly. As I understand it, he goes right from having a restraining order imposed on him to stay away from the house, to go buy beer and cigarettes, and to go straight to the house and to get revenge. He's probably had a slug of beer, he smoked a cigarette, and then he starts shooting people. That's the prosecution's case. 2 of the people, fortunately, are able to flee, but they can testify against him. They're precipient witnesses to him shooting. So there really is, you have to believe in miracles to think he has any hope on that. So I believe it's a psychological defense.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. Look, just to let you folks at home know what happened in the case, they wrapped up in the midst of the last break we were taking. No more testimony today, but you're going to want to stick around because we're going to play for you now some testimony that you missed during an earlier break where a neighbor who apparently is also a best friend to the husband defendant was talking about the defendant discovering sex toys in his wife's home and then bringing them to this friend neighbor and saying, I think my wife's messing around. even though we're separated. That is where the testimony went. We're going to review that testimony now.
Of course.
That was testimony from a neighbor who also apparently was a best friend to the defendant, a husband accused of killing his wife and his wife's best friend in the midst of a separation. David Katz is here to break this down. Look, this guy's taking pictures of some new guy mowing his friend's wife's lawn and then sends them to the friend and then eventually learns the friend is the shooter, okay, which the friend concedes. Is this guy instigating this a little bit or what? I mean, what do you make of what he did? What do you make of his behavior?
Well, he is sort of an instigator, and but at the same time, of course, it is the friend who shot the people. But I would just think that he would be more remorseful in his attitude toward this.
Or was he helping his friend, the defendant, try to catch the wife and you know, like, maybe that's what was going through his mind when he took the picture?
He's a hard person to figure out, and you sort of wonder whether he hired a lawyer himself because, you know, not that he did anything wrong, but at the same time, you might just wonder, finding yourself in the middle of this, and, you know, you are the one who sent these photos. You are the one who, like, when he saw these sex toys, you'd think that he would have said something pretty sharp to his friend, like, look, leave it alone, stop, you know, don't go there. Apparently, at least according to the opening statement, the defendant had a girlfriend himself. That might have been a good time to remind him, you know, you've moved on.
You've moved on.
Moved on.
She's moved on. Why don't you just go your separate ways and live in peace? If there's anything that I guess we can armchair quarterback, we can look back, hindsight 2020, that this guy on the stand could have done or maybe should have done, it would have been something like that. All too often, these cases sound like two people who've got a dispute, and it's somewhere in the trial almost every single time this light bulb moment goes off, for me at least, and I say that's the moment when somebody needed to say, you two just need to walk away from one another right now. And this guy was the one with the last clear chance to do that, perhaps.
Well, you know, again, I'm not blaming him for anything, and I'm sure he feels bad about it. But you sure wish that he had done more. Again, with 2020 hindsight, like a lot of cases, you wish someone, the case you guys covered just a couple of days ago, I bet that lady really wished she'd called 911 before that awful thing happened with that kid.
Yeah, there was a conviction in that case across the board, all counts. Of course, we're just talking briefly about the Georgia case where a father was indeed convicted today after a very short deliberation of inflicting fatal injuries onto a 10-year-old special needs child who he fostered and then adopted. That case wrapped up today. But back to the Colley case here, you know, again, maybe it's easier for me to see this because I'm looking at the facts, you know, from an unbiased perspective. You know, in the heat of the moment, people's emotions are raw. That's understandable. But in almost every case, it just seems that there's a moment where you know, things could have gone the right way, and then they went drastically wrong. And this is one such case. You've got the neighbor taking pictures of the new boyfriend, the new lover, whatever you want to call it, you know, mowing the wife's grass. But you know, as we were pointing out, if he's moved on, why is he jealous of her for moving on? I mean, that's a double standard.
Well, there's all these things that happen in murder cases where you see the worst side of human nature. That's why people are fascinated by murder cases. Like I said, when I was a prosecutor, I had one, even in federal court. It was a postal carrier. She was just on her rounds. Someone shot her, and they tried to put on a lay mental defense. And like I said before, I don't think those work. I think if you're really going to put on a mental defense, you have to put on a mental defense with experts on the defense side.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be clear cut, and that's the reason for the statute. But we're going to wrap up for the day. David Katz in town here on the East Coast from the West Coast. Good to see you here in the studio.
Great to see you. Pleasure.
All right, we're going to wrap up the day, as I said, here on the Law and Crime Network. More testimony Monday morning in the James Colley case. We're live starting at 9 a.m. For now, this is Aaron Keller, and for everybody here, have a great weekend.